So I talked generally about the different objectives that you have for Facebook campaigns, and I gave you a few things to consider in setting those objectives. So the first thing is, do you think that the people you're targeting are in market or out of market? And chances are, unless you have like a specific list that you purchased or generated using intent data, most people are probably going to be out of market, which means that your objectives are probably going to be more about educating and generating awareness, and we'll talk about later how to transition them into the buying mindset. And the other thing that I gave you was a model for mapping out people's various stages of awareness, and that's going to help you make a decision about what kinds of objectives to set. So the other thing I want you to consider is the Salesforce 3-2-1 strategy. Now, the Salesforce 3-2-1 strategy is basically a way to think about how to do email marketing. But I'm going to generalize it. I'm going to say that the same concept can be applied when you're doing business-to-business Facebook advertising as well. So if we consider how most people approach traditional marketing, they would say, we're going to start at the top of the funnel and focus on cold leads, so people that have very low levels of awareness. And then we're going to focus on people that are a bit warm, maybe they're somewhat familiar, and then we're going to focus on the hot people, so the people that are ready to buy now. What the Salesforce 3-2-1 strategy does is it completely flips the funnel on its head and says, your number one priority is to focus on the hot leads, so the people that are ready to buy now. These are your low-hanging fruit. Your number two priority is the warm leads, people that are somewhat familiar but aren't ready to buy now. And then you focus on the cold people, which are probably not going to buy for another year or so. Now, this isn't universal, but I would say, particularly if you're in a small company, that you should probably focus on the bottom of the funnel first, if this is the type of funnel that you're working in, because this is where you're going to get the immediate sales. This is where the low-hanging fruit is. That's where you're able to generate serious financial impact in the short term. Now, if you're working in a large company, I would say there's often too much of a focus on those hot leads, too much of a focus on the short term. What you should probably be doing is spending more time on these cold leads by hitting them with the kinds of advertising that is more focused on brand building and generating broad awareness, thought leadership, that sort of stuff, because that's where you're dealing with longer time horizons. But regardless of which end of the funnel you're focusing on the most, or which audience group that you're catering to the most, I would say that it's easiest to start at the bottom of the funnel, even though a lot of marketers don't. So what I would first try to do is figure out how to sell the product, like the specific use cases, the compelling value proposition, the positioning of the product, and I would start by building Facebook ads to sell the product. And then I would work my way up the funnel and think about, okay, now that I know how to sell the product and how to get people actually talking to salespeople, let's think about how I get them to that stage. And that's going to be by doing things in the warm stage of the funnel, which is going to be more centered around things like maybe case studies or webinars. And then I would think about content to hit the cold people, which is going to be more, how do I generate broad awareness? How do I generate thought leadership pieces and this sort of thing? So even though in execution you might be launching all of these different types of Facebook ads simultaneously, I would say that generally speaking, it's easier to start with kind of how do I sell to hot leads, and then work your way up and think about the broader types of marketing you can take. Now, when you're actually designing things like retargeting funnels and stuff, the sequence might look like it goes from cold to warm to hot, but I would say when you're actually coming up with what those specific ads are, I would do the reverse. I would start with the bottom of the funnel content, and then if you have time, you start thinking about what the thought leadership is going to look like. Okay, so from a business-to-business perspective, I would say that there are 4 objectives for campaigns that you're probably going to focus on the most. Now, I don't know your nuanced situation. Maybe you're in business-to-business e-commerce, which is a growing field right now, in which case yes, you're going to be focused on conversions, things like catalog sales. But I would say that in general, these are the ones that are probably going to be most applicable to you. Okay? Now, if your main offering is a mobile app, then sure, app installs is going to be a meaningful proposition for you. But the reality is that a lot of business-to-business applications are not being sold on Apple's App Store or Google Play. They're being sold on things like Salesforce App Exchange. So it's going to be much harder to market something like that using the app installs objective here in Facebook. So the ones that are going to be very important for most people is, number one, is lead generation. So you're going to be using the lead generation objective to get people to actually talk to your salespeople, to request price quotes, to request free consultations, to request demos, to sign up for free trials, these types of things. So I don't care if you're selling a business-to-business service, you're selling a SaaS product, you're selling some sort of industrial equipment, lead generation is probably the first objective that you're going to want to start because of what I told you earlier, which is that we kind of want to focus at the bottom of the funnel first. Let's figure out how we're going to actually get people to have conversations with sales, and then later, if we have the resources, we can think about how to scale that up to hit people that are not ready to talk to sales. Now, I've had a lot of success here with this style of lead generation objective. The only problem is it's less scalable, right? There are only so many people. If we use kind of that general rule of thumb, it might only be 5% of the people that are ready to take us up on this kind of offer. So we still need something to hit the other 95%. And what those are is going to be some of these other objectives that are very important. So one is video views. I think video views are one of the most effective ways to hit people at the levels of awareness where they need to be educated more. And it's also the easiest way to see if people are actually consuming the content. So one of the challenges when you go with something like cost per impression, which is like an awareness type of metric, you don't know if they're actually paying attention. You don't know if you're raising their level of awareness or are they just being exposed to your logo. But when you use something like video views, you can be like, okay, they actually watched 90% of my case study or my testimonial, or they watched my product demo halfway through. That person's pretty informed. And you can make some pretty educated guesses based on their engagement in a video, whether they're going to be receptive to a follow-up advertisement or a follow-up email or something that is going to push them further down into a sales conversation. Okay, so traffic is similar, right? If somebody goes to a blog post that has extensive detail about the use cases of your product, they're probably ready to see a video demo of your product, if not, perhaps a one-on-one demo of your product. Or if they go to a blog post on your website that is talking about a critical problem that you're in a unique position to solve as a professional service provider, they're probably going to be receptive to a free consultation. That's something to think about. Now, the other one that does not get enough attention in business to business is brand awareness. Now, what we know is that when companies get big enough, business to business companies, they generally get there by focusing on demand generation. Okay, short-term sales activation is the term that a lot of researchers use. And there's heavy emphasis on basically marketing as a sales support function. But there's kind of this inflection point after maybe $5-10 million in annual revenue where companies need to really focus more on building a brand. Because long term, there's tons of data to show that building business-to-business brand awareness and fame so that your brand immediately comes to mind when that buying situation arises. And keep in mind, for 95% of business-to-business buyers, that buying situation is not right now. It's going to be in the future. You want them to think about your brand when that future buying event happens. So one of the ways that you do that is with brand awareness. Now, with brand awareness, maybe you're not spending aggressively, right? Maybe it's just you're hitting people with a message of a frequency of once per week. Okay, maybe they're exposed to your logo and what you do once per week for 52 weeks, and then maybe next year or after 6 months, when the need arises for whatever you're selling, maybe they need a lawyer, maybe they need a business consultant, maybe they need some ERP software, you might be more strongly considered because you had run a brand awareness campaign. The problem is that there's a stigma against the style of advertising in the business-to-business space, and it's because it's not as quantifiable in the short term, in the under 6 months range. But we know that long term, in terms of economies of scale and overall efficiency, that's something that you need to do when you're doing an integrated campaign. Okay, so let's go next into a little bit of details about what each of these objectives is, and then you can decide for yourself which one is appropriate to start with.